Shalom. I want to start off this video by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushua, Bahashim Rakah Kodash. I want to give double honors to my apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, in grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. This is your fellow servant, Rakah from the GMS Orlando camp. And tonight I want to go over a brief lesson dealing with the Israelite Diaspora. Alright, and tonight's lesson is inspired by a couple of clips that I seen earlier today, which are going to be included at the end of tonight's lesson, that go into a brief history dealing with the dispersion of the Israelites, alright, the true Israelites, which today consist of you so-called Negroes, you so-called Latinos, and you so-called Native American Indians. Alright, and the reason why we say so-called is because your true nationality, your true heritage, your true culture goes back to that of the biblical Israelites. All right, and this is able to be proven and tracked through prophecy. All right, so without further ado, we're just going to hop straight into it. Lord's when this is edifying unto you like Akim and Akwaf out there. All right, because when we understand the scattering, all right, that happened to our nation, we better understand who the Gentiles are spoken of in the New Testament. All right, those Gentiles promise salvation and reconciliation unto the Lord. All right, ultimately speaking about the Israelites who were scattered into these other nations, who were calling themselves by the other nations' names, who were practicing the traditions of the other nations, who came looking like the other nations, speaking like the other nations. All right, but in fact, their genealogy, their lineage went back into the nation of Israel. You see, and it also helps us get a better understanding of who the Israelites are today. All right, because just like during the time of the apostles, we have Israelites today who are scattered amongst these other nations, all right, who come looking like other nations, speaking like other nations, practicing the same traditions as the other nations. All right, but their genealogy, their lineage goes back into the nation of Israel, and they're included in the promises and the salvation as well, as long as they meet the requirements of repentance, all right, unto the true Lord, Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushua, all right, in sincerity and in truth. But without further ado, we're just going to hop straight into it. Lord, this is edifying unto you elect. All right, now the first thing I want to start off in is here in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. All right, now we're going to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. It contains the blessings and the curses that were promised to happen to the nation of Israel if they would listen to the Lord, if they would listen to the commandment of the Lord, or if they wouldn't listen to the commandment of the Lord. All right, if they would listen to the commandment of the Lord, the blessings will fall upon the nation of Israel. But if they didn't hearken unto the commandment of the Lord prophesied of curses that will befall the nation of Israel. All right, and among some of those curses was a scattering into all nations. All right, this is Deuteronomy chapter 28. And matter of fact, let's start at verse 1, and then we're going to jump down and get the point. All right, so this is Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1. It says, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord." So it was prophesied, all right, that if we will hearken unto the voice of the Lord, that we will be blessed as a nation. We'll be set above all nations on the face of the earth. All right, but it was prophesied if we didn't listen that this would happen. Deuteronomy 28, starting at verse 15. "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy power, to observe to do all his commandments and the statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." All right, now from verse 16 on down to 68 are the curses, but we're just going to touch on this specific curse contained in verse 64. It reads, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." So a part of the curses that befell the Israelites for not hearkening unto the voice of the Lord was a scattering. The Lord said he will scatter us among all people. Now let's grab a couple of more precepts that solidify this statement. All right, this is Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 27. It says, start at verse 26. It reads, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whither unto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. And the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. All right, let's grab this. In Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 15. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the heathen, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send a sword after them till I have consumed them. Let's grab one more. This is Ezekiel 22 and verse 15. And I will scatter thee among the heathen, and disperse thee in the countries, and I will consume thy filthiness out of thee. All right, let's grab this in Psalms chapter 106 and verse 27. It says, 26 actually. It says, therefore he lifted up his hand against them to overthrow them in the wilderness, to overthrow their seed also among the nations, and to scatter them in the lands. All right, now, as you can see, it's full well proven, all right, that the Lord prophesied of a scattering that will happen to the nation Israel for their disobedience. All right, now, upon this scattering, all right, it's important to understand what happened during the scattering of our nation. All right, because during the scattering of our nation, our people started to mingle with the heathens. All right, and they learned their works, they learned their traditions, their gods. They started worshiping their gods. All right, they started mingling with their women, which is a very important point to understand. But we're going to read down, all right, in this chapter. It reads, to overthrow their seed among the heathens and to scatter them in the lands. They joined themselves unto Baal Peor and ate the sacrifices of the dead. Thus they provoked him to anger with their inventions, and the plague break in upon them. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment, so the plagues were stayed. And that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. They angered him also at the waters of strife, that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake it unadvisedly with his lips. They did not destroy the nations, concerning whom the Lord commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. All right, let's get this word mingle. Awarab. It says to pledge, to exchange, to occupy, overtake, to give and pledge, to fellowship with, to share. Becometh, undertake, occupy, engaged, surety, to traffic. All right, just wanted to see what that word meant. But it says in verse 34, they did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a-whoring with their own inventions. All right, but the point being, in verse 34, it says, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. All right, now upon this scattering that happened to our nation, all right, when you understand what happened during the scattering, you understand that our people mingled themselves among the heathen. They learned their works, they learned their traditions, they learned their language. All right, even going back into the book of Nehemiah. All right, our people always had an affinity, when it comes to learning the works of the heathens, diving into their customs, their traditions, And also, upon this scattering, all right, while our people were mingling and learning the works of the heathens, they were also bedding heathen women. All right, they were also having sex. So just to put it plainly, with heathen women, all right, which they brought forth children. All right, and those children, even though they are Israelites because you are who your father is. All right, let's get that real quick. Let's prove that. This is Numbers chapter 1 and verse 18. It reads, "And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward by their polls." All right, so you are who your father is because your father carries the seed. All right, just to put it in a similitude. All right, if you plant an apple seed in the ground, all right, no matter where you plant it, okay, I'll take an apple seed from America and plant it in China or India or Afghanistan or China. What's going to grow out of that ground is still going to be an apple tree, no matter where I plant that seed in the ground. Likewise, men's seed. All right, no matter where men plant their seed, that child that is brought forth is going to be of that man's lineage, no matter what ground he plants it in, no matter what womb that seed, that sperm is planted in. You see? So when it comes to the nation of Israel, or when it comes to any nation, when a man of that nation has sex with a woman of the other nations or a woman of another nation, that child that is brought forth is of that father's lineage. So as our people were scattered amongst these other nations and they started mingling among the heathen and bedding different heathen women, all right, they brought forth different children. You know, they brought forth children, and those children bedded heathen women as they were occupied in the heathen lands. You know, as they were occupied in these other countries, they bedded heathen women. They had sex with heathen women, and that continued on for many generations. And as you can imagine, that quote unquote Israelite persona, that Israelite look, began to fade. You have many examples like that today when it comes to these different athletes like Blake Griffin. When you look at his family, his father is a Levite, a very dark-skinned Levite, and his mother is an Edomite. All right, which an Edomite is a so-called white person, a so-called Caucasian. Their true biblical nationality is of Edom. All right, Idumea. But when you look at his lineage, his father, his mother, and how he came out light-skinned, fairly light-skinned, a fair-skinned Israelite man, because once again, his father was a Levite, which makes him an Israelite. All right, now he in turn went and copulated with another Edomite woman, Blake Griffin. All right, and when you look at their son, he looks like a complete Edomite, blonde hair, blue eyes, but once again, his father's an Israelite, which makes him an Israelite. You see? So, as you can imagine, as our people are scattered in these other lands, copulating with these other women of the other nations, you have Israelites who are coming out looking like Moabites, looking like Ammonites or Ishmaelites or Elamites. All right, but in fact, their lineage goes back into the nation of Israel. You see, and that's very important. That's very instrumental in understanding who those Gentiles are speaking about in the New Testament and who the Israelites are today, because you have a lot of Negroites, all right, which believe that the nation of Israel looks completely dark. All Israel is like Wesley Snipes, which is a falsehood. All right, and that's ultimately shutting up the kingdom of heaven to our brethren, which is a great offense. Which is a very great offense. All right. The Lord said we should not offend one of his little ones. All right. And by cutting off the promises, the blessings unto our brethren who are scattered into these other nations, we're offending the little ones. All right. So it's very important to understand the scattering that happened to our nation, the diaspora of our people. All right. But going back into Deuteronomy 28, all right, because this scattering happened by way of slavery, mainly. All right, well, you did have our people who traveled into other lands, who sojourned in other lands, naturally. But a brunt of this scattering happened through way of chattel slavery, all right, which is prophesied in verse 68. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now it's very important to understand the Exodus, the first Exodus of the Israelites and Moses. All right, Moses leading the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, all right, by the hand of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. It's very important to understand that account, because when you understand that account, you understand that the nation of Israel walked out of Egypt, and there was no need for ships to begin with. There's no need for a ship to be taken from the land of Israel, to Egypt. There's no need. You can walk there, So when it says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, you understand. It's very important to understand what this is talking about. All right, this is talking about chattel slavery. All right, ships that brought so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians into North, South, and Central America. All right. Now, it says, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. All right, and we know this to be a fact when we look at the different auctioning blocks, the different auctions that were being had for so-called Negroes here in America. All right, so-called Latinos, so-called Native Americans here in the Americas, over there in South America, North America. All right, that's an evident fact. That's a part of secular history that can't be denied. Which all goes back to prophecy. So let's grab these last two precepts and then we'll close it out and allow the clips to play out. This is John chapter 7 and verse 35. It says, then the Jews said among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles to teach the Gentiles? So it was common knowledge back then as well that we had certain Israelites who were dispersed amongst the Gentiles. All right, this was common knowledge. Why? Because the knowledge of our heritage wasn't lost at this point. All right, we still knew who we were. Okay, we still knew of the curses that befell our people. Okay, we still knew of our history, all right, our culture, our heritage. So it was a very known fact back during this time that you had Israelites who were dispersed amongst other nations. All right, let's get this in James chapter 1. In verse 1, it says, James, a servant of the Heavenly Father and of the Lord Yahushua Mashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Greeting. All right. So it was a known fact, all right, that the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, were scattered abroad. You see? Let's get this last one. This is Tobit chapter 13 and verse 3. Confess him before the Gentiles, ye children of Israel, for he hath scattered us among them. There declare his greatness and extol him before all the living, for he is our Lord, and he is the power of our Father forever. All right, so it was very common knowledge, back during the time of our forefathers, that we had brethren who were scattered, dispersed amongst these other nations, all right, who were part of the promises. Who were part of the promises. Now you had those of the circumcision, all right, namely those who knew they were Israelites, who sojourned in the land, namely Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, all right, who sojourned in the land of Israel, all right, who kept the customs, who kept the traditions of that the Lord handed down to us, all right, who didn't like this fact. They didn't like it, them being reconciled, because they felt as if they felt as if they didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve the promises because they weren't keeping the customs like they were. They weren't following the Lord like they were. They weren't speaking the language. They weren't keeping the traditions, the customs, that our forefathers kept. Same thing today, with these different Negroites who believe that, our brethren who are scattered abroad into Northern and Southern America don't belong in the promises, don't belong or not a part of the heritage or the promises that the Lord left to our nation. But with that being said, we're just going to play these couple of clips. Lord willing, this will be edifying unto you. All right. and understanding the Israelite diaspora. All right, Shalom. And I want to put out a disclaimer as well before we get into the videos that we are not Africans. All right, we are not Africans. We are Israelites. Okay, there's a difference between us and the Africans. All right, Africans are Hamites according to the Bible. All right, we are Israelites. Okay, and in the clips that you're going to view, all right, you're going to hear a lot about the African diaspora and the Afro diaspora and this, that, and the third. But it's important to understand that we are not Africans. All right, first and foremost, there was no African diaspora. There was an Israelite diaspora. All right, there wasn't blacks selling blacks into slavery, Africans selling the Africans into slavery. That's a falsehood. All right, there were Africans or Hamites selling Israelites into slavery. All right, and that's prophecy. Let's get that real quick in Joel chapter 3 and verse 6 is verse 5. 4. Yeah, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, both Hamitic nations, and all the coast of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? If you recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried it into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold to the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. All right, and just as it says, all right, Tyre and Zidon sold us into the Grecians. The Grecians being who? The Edomites. All right, and the Edomites are referring to, or the Grecians are referring to, the Edomites, who are the so-called white race today, the so-called Caucasian race. That is their biblical nationality, Edom or Idumea, the Grecians. All right, and we were sold into the Grecians by these Hamites. All right, for muzzleloading guns, rum, cheap rum, and wine. All right, so it's important to understand that there's a difference between us and the Hamites. Let's get one more scripture. This is Exodus chapter 11 and verse 7. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how that the Lord hath put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. All right, know that there's a difference between us and Hamites. Salaki. All right, there's a difference between us and these Hamites. All right, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians are not Africans. Once again, we are Israelites. And it's important to understand that. All right, so with that being said, shalom.
To say it's going to upset some people right next here. Okay. Christopher Columbus did not discover America.
People of African descent go back hundreds of years in Mexico, but as a group, Afro-Mexicans are largely invisible.
Ay, tú eres cubana, ¿no? Porque también ahí dices, ota madre, el clásico cliché.
During the Civil War era, black Union soldiers in Louisiana developed a relationship with Mexicans and Mexican Americans.
After the Civil War, St. Mary's history professor Teresa Van Hoy says black Union soldiers helped to liberate Mexico from French control.
After the war, they snuck across to Mexico
to help Mexicans and Mexican Americans overthrow the French.
Eres cubana o brasileña o colombiana o venezolana, de algún otro lado menos mexicano.
In his diary of his second voyage, Columbus tells of how the natives of Hispaniola actually had given him gold-tipped metal spearheads that they said were brought by black-skinned people who had come in large boats from the south and southeast. These spearheads were covered in this metal that this alloy that the inhabitants called guanin, which dun 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 matched the metal used in spearheads made in Western Africa for thousands of years, as carried by medieval African warriors, including the Mali and the Moors. The West Africans even called this metal guanine, the same name used by the natives of Hispaniola. But nothing more was said about that. These murals are from the Temple of the Warriors at Chichen Itza. Now, they clearly feature, the color version is easier to see, but they clearly feature three races. And it's depicting black and Indian allies and a battle against white invaders. leaders. And because this mural shows that blacks are clearly fighting on the side of the Mayans, that they must have been integrated into society much longer before this painting was done. There are numerous pre-Columbian figurines with striking similarities to ancient African artwork, and they've been found in Central and South America. In southeastern Mexico, there are 18 rock statues of heads up to 11 feet tall that are facing the ocean. These people that they modeled them after must have been important. Whoever they were, they must have been important to be remembered or obeyed or worshipped. Well, Jose Meglia Serrano, the archaeologist who first uncovered them, he pointed out that facial features look amazingly like African blacks, and they all display distinctive headgear or protective helmets.
Son personas afrodescendientes de todas partes, que tienen hijos y que van dejando generaciones en esta diversidad de lo que es la afrodiáspora.
Van Hoy says before slavery ended in America, slaves would flee to Mexico by following trails left in the sand by Mexican wagoneers who traded.
Be talking about Afro-Colombians, people of African descent that are in Colombia and South America. Afro-Colombians are located in Colombia and nearby coastal islands. The estimated population of the group is around 14 million, and they can be categorized into 4 different groups. The first 2 groups, being the Black community and the Afro-Colombian community, are broad classifications for all Colombians of African descent in the country, while the other 2 groups, the Palenqueros and the Raizales, have their own distinct cultures and languages. The Palenqueros live in the Afro-Colombian town of San Basilio, Palenque. They speak a mix of Spanish and Palenquero. This town was founded around 1599, and the word Palenque refers to this settlement of freed enslaved Africans. The most famous African from the city would be Bincos Biajo. Once, he was a member of African royalty from Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, but was taken into slavery to Colombia. In 1599, he would escape with other enslaved Africans and form this town. He would escape, form ways of communication between slaves, and freed more slaves. He escaped away from the Spanish Empire many times, and eventually the Spanish would make a deal with him. If he would stop freeing slaves, as well as accepting them, the Spanish would leave his settlement alone. The Spanish would not hold up on their side of the treaty and killed Bincos in 1621. The Raizales are Afro-Colombians that live off of the coast, on the islands of San Andreas, Santa Catalina, and Providencia. These islands are located between Colombia and Jamaica within the Caribbean Sea. The Raizales speak a mix of Spanish, Creole, and English. This is due to many foreign powers fighting over the islands throughout the history of Colombia. The island of San Andreas became tax-free in 1953, and this led to many non-Afro-Colombians creating business on the island. While other Colombians were creating businesses, this would widen the gap of wealth between the Raizales and other Colombians. Afro-Colombians began being imported as slaves in the 1520s. The Africans came from African countries such as modern-day Ghana, Nigeria, Gambia, Congo, Angola, Mali, Senegal, Cameroon, and Sierra Leone. These Africans were forced to work sugarcane plantations, cattle ranches, and gold mines. These Africans would pioneer the extracting of gold deposits and the growing process of sugarcane in many parts of the country. Labor was also a big part of development for the country, and Africans were the main tool to developing the cotton, tobacco, and textile industries. Afro-Colombians also played a big part in Colombia's independence from Spain. It is said that every 3 of 5 soldiers were African in the Colombian army. Many Afro-Colombians also lived in the jungle areas for protection at this time and built a relationship with other indigenous Colombian peoples. This event also happened due to the government of Colombia at the time promoting the ideology of mixing. So in order for Africans and Amerindians to maintain their cultural traditions, they would live within the jungle away from other populations. Amerindians and Afro-Colombians were also targeted for their lands, so other Colombians could develop more coffee, banana, and sugarcane plantations. In 1944, El Choco would be the first majority African political administrative division.